Yes.
President Trump just wrapping up his speech to a graduating class at FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia, but also taking time to attack the Bureau over the legitimacy of the Russia investigation. Good Friday morning to you. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
We made it. It's Friday. We made it.
It is Friday.
I can't believe it. I'm Melissa Francis. The president with plenty to say ahead of his scheduled speech. Here's just a taste of his remarks to reporters on his way to the ceremony.
The level of anger at what they've been witnessing with respect to the FBI is certainly very sad.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live on the North Lawn, and that was just a little bit of what he had to say.
Yeah, let me tell you, Melissa, he's been talking about this for quite some time, both on Twitter and, of course, today over at Quantico. Let's be clear, White House officials for quite some time have felt that there was this bias against the president among the higher-ups at the FBI who were investigating Hillary Clinton at the time. And the president today, well, he was presidential in his remarks over at the graduation over at Quantico, celebrating the history of the Bureau and calling on all in attendance to do the bidding of the American people. That is, with fidelity, bravery, and integrity.
I want you to deliver a message to your fellow officers. The President of the United States has your back 100%. I will fight for you. And I will never, ever let you down, ever. Now, more than ever, we must support the men and women in blue.
Now, that is consistent with his messaging about law enforcement in general. But maybe you would think it's a little inconsistent compared to what he said previously about the Bureau, because he tweeted this back on December 3rd, after years of Comey, with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worst in history. But fear not, we will bring it back to greatness. Well, he celebrated its greatness today, but keep in mind, after all, it was Comey who more or less took one for the team in declaring publicly, instead of the Attorney General, that there simply wasn't enough evidence to charge then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton with a crime related to storing and disseminating classified documents from her private email server. And, of course, it was Mueller who then picked up the Russia investigation baton, first suggested by the Clinton camp after the shocking loss in the 2016 election, about which the president said this just before heading over to Quantico.
They're spending millions and millions of dollars. There is absolutely no collusion. I didn't make a phone call to Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. Everybody knows it. That was a Democrat hoax. It was an excuse for losing the election. And it should have never been this way, where they spend all these millions of dollars. So now even the Democrats admit there's no collusion. There is no collusion. That's it.
Okay, guys, so here's what I want you to keep an eye on. You're going to hear the president say one thing and then maybe change his messaging depending on time and place. Some people would say that's wildly inconsistent, or you could make the argument, as some White House officials have made with me, depending on the time and place, that is the accurate and appropriate messaging. Now, by the way, this weekend he'll be making his way up to Camp David. He's expected to receive the usual battery of security briefings and maybe even make a few phone calls to try to push tax reform over the finish line. Of course, we'll be watching that very carefully from here. But for now, back to you.
All right, Kevin Corke, thank you.
And so what I have said consistently, privately, I guess now it's in the press, is that unless they figure out a way to increase the refundable part higher than $1,100, unless they can figure out a way to add to the 1,100 figure, I won't support the bill.
Yeah, the Republican tax bill could be on shaky ground after Senator Marco Rubio, whom you just heard, threatens to vote no over a tax credit for working-class families. That possibility puts the GOP's razor-thin margin in the Senate closer to the brink. So what happens now? Joining us, Glenn Hall, chief editor for Dow Jones Newswires. Marco Rubio has been very active on this point. The GOP cannot afford to lose votes. They've got a 52-48 margin in the Senate right now. And there are a handful of Republican senators who seem to be upset, Marco Rubio among them. Here's what he said this morning in a tweet storm of sorts. The working class is always forgotten in D.C. We need to add more tax cuts for working class parents, especially those earning $20,000 to $50,000. Tax deal doubles the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000, but for millions of working class families, only 55% of that $2,000 is available to them. He says, I can only support the bill if the percentage of the $2,000 child tax credit available to working class families is increased to percentage meaningfully higher than 55%. It's always hard to read tweets and make them sound natural. But you have news on that.
It does seem that his lobbying there was effective. Our Wall Street Journal reporters up on the Hill are hearing that they have now agreed in this compromise bill to make it $1,400 from the $1,100 previously slotted for the child tax credit. And it is believed that that might be enough to satisfy Marco Rubio.
And if you get Marco Rubio's vote, are you in? Well, that is the tax bill.
It's certainly better than without him. There are some wild cards in all of this still. There's still some concerns about the impact on the deficit and the spending side.
That's what has Bob Corker concerned.
That's what's got Bob Corker concerned, and how they're going to offset these things. Remember, there's a $1.5 trillion spending limit over a decade that has to be kept below, because that's the framework that they're working under. And there's one other thing, John, that they have to be mindful of, is you've got two senators that have health issues right now. And if they're not able to vote, that's your 2-vote margin lost right there. So they're working around those issues as well.
Yeah, John McCain still undergoing treatments at Walter Reed in connection to his brain cancer treatments. That's got to be a tough one for Mitch McConnell to try to figure out when to schedule this vote.
Absolutely, and they're on a tight deadline here. They want to get this done next week. So the plans, today they'll reveal what the conference committee language is. We're expecting that by the end of the day. They're signing off on it right now in committee. And then, there was supposed to be a vote maybe as early as Monday or Tuesday, and we're waiting to see what the schedule looks like.
The idea being that if they get this done by Christmas, does that give the government, time to get the new tax rates out so that people's first paycheck of the year reflects a little bit more take home?
There is some concern about that, yes. That's a pretty tight turnaround for all of those, that's a lot of forms and a lot of changes that need to be implemented. It might have to be that some of this gets addressed retroactively.
But the president promised a tax cut for Christmas, and it appears they're going to be ready to deliver.
They're getting very close.
Glenn Hall from Dow Jones News Service. Glenn, thank you. Melissa.
The United States looking to increase pressure on a defiant North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson speaking before members of the United Nations Security Council at a special meeting this morning.
North Korean regime's continuing unlawful missile launches and testing activities signal its contempt for the United States, its neighbors in Asia, and all members of the United Nations. In face of such a threat, inaction is unacceptable for any nation.
Brian Yanis joins us live right now outside the UN with more. Brian.
Well, Melissa, look, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson urged the UN Security Council to continue pressure and sanctions on North Korea. He also called out Russia and China, saying that it's not enough just to vote for increased sanctions, as they have been doing through the UN Security Council. The notion that he said on Tuesday this morning, Tuesday earlier this week, in which he said that there would be no preconditions for the U.S. to talk to North Korea. He had said earlier this week that the U.S. would be willing to speak to North Korea as soon as they wanted to. Well, today he walked that back just moments ago. Take a listen.
But our hope remains that diplomacy will produce a resolution. As I said earlier this week, a sustained cessation of North Korea's threatening behavior must occur before talks can begin. North Korea must earn its way back to the table. The pressure campaign must and will continue until denuclearization is achieved. We will, in the meantime, keep our channels of communication open.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, as well as other members of the UN Security Council, have made it clear today that what the UN wants to do is actually act as an intermediary, making sure that there is no miscalculation or miscommunication that could escalate this into a devastating war. That is what the UN is trying to do. And in fact, just last week, the UN's top political affairs head, the Undersecretary Jeffrey Feltman, went to North Korea for a meeting, a first of its kind meeting between the UN and senior officials of North Korea in about 8 years. And what they talked about there was about a 15-hour back and forth. And the North Koreans said ultimately that it was important to prevent war, but they were uncommitted when it came to whether or not they would engage in talks. So the UN trying all they can to exhaust all options. But one thing that is clear is that this Security Council will not accept a nuclear North Korea. And North Korea, as of now, doesn't seem like they will accept being denuclearized themselves. Melissa.
Brian Yanis, thank you.
Well, the Washington rumor mill kicks into high gear after House Speaker Paul Ryan hints at retirement. Is a rocking chair really in his future? Plus, Ambassador Nikki Haley making a dramatic presentation at the UN on how Iran is violating resolutions in the Middle East. The evidence she is showing the world body just ahead.
Iran is determined to undermine the international consensus against its conduct. We must speak with one voice in exposing the regime for what it is, a threat to the peace and security of the entire world.
Well, House Speaker Paul Ryan denying that he plans to retire from Congress after the midterm elections next year. The speculation all started after some media outlets reported that Ryan had conducted soul-searching conversations with friends about his future. According to Politico, staying in Congress until the midterms would let Ryan pursue tax reform and overhaul benefit programs like Medicare. Ryan insists he's staying right where he is. The White House also pushing back on those reports.
The president did speak to the speaker not too long ago, and very clearly and in no uncertain terms that if that news was true, he was very unhappy with it. The speaker assured the president that those were not accurate reports and that they looked forward to working together for a long time to come.
Ryan took the speaker's job when former Speaker John Boehner stepped aside in 2015.
Staying on Capitol Hill, the Republican tax bill hitting a speed bump as it approaches the finish line. GOP leaders had hoped to unveil its final version today, but are pushing it back until Monday after two Republican senators voiced concerns about the child tax credit for working-class families. Amid the last-minute drama, the White House urging Republicans to get the deal done once and for all.
We hope that this tax bill actually gets to the president's desk because it is the largest tax increase we've seen in just about, the tax decrease, the tax cut we've seen in about 30 years, which is extremely exciting for us. And we would expect that most Republicans get on board with.
Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio sits on the Senate Finance Committee. Sir, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us about where it stands today? It seemed like it was certain. Now, all of a sudden, we're pushing back to Monday.
Yeah, no, I feel good about it. I think it'll be out either tonight or tomorrow, and then we'll have a vote probably Tuesday or Wednesday. And look, I think the votes were there last time in the Senate, of course. They'll be there again this time because the bill, if anything, is improved after the House-Senate conference. I think you'll see substantial middle-class tax relief, which is what a lot of people are looking for. And in terms of the child tax credit, I think you'll see some improvements there for folks who are at the lower end of the economic ladder. So I think it'll be a very popular bill, and among our Republican colleagues, I think we'll get the votes.
But are lawmakers frustrated with Senator Rubio for throwing a last-minute monkey wrench in there? Because I'm sure, everybody has something that they would like to have improved.
Yeah, look, Marco has a passion for being sure that the child tax credit really works for families who are maybe not paying income tax but paying payroll taxes, and that's why he's insistent on the refundability. I respect that. I think he's looking out for the very people we're all trying to help, and so I think in the end the bill will be improved, and I think we'll get the support of our Republican colleagues. And I hope some Democrats will take a look at it. After all, it is tax cuts for middle-class families. It is helping folks who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, as Marco has insisted. And it also makes our businesses and our workers competitive again. And we can't have the current situation where jobs and investment are going overseas.
But those who would take the other side from Senator Rubio would say that the goal of this was to make it simpler. And this adds another complexity. It's another deduction. It's another loophole. It's moving in the opposite direction of the original plan was to lower taxes for all, and this goes back to favoring a certain group.
Yeah, well, we already have the child tax credit, as you know, and we do double that child tax credit, but we also disallow the personal exemption, and so that's part of how you overcome that, which was a simplification, as you know. We also doubled the standard deduction, which is a terrific simplification for about 90% of Americans who will take that. About 2/3 do already, but with doubling it, you're going to see a lot of folks now literally being able to use one page for their tax return because they're not going to have all these deductions, credits, exemptions you're talking about. They're just going to take the standard deduction. So it provides tax relief, but it also provides simplification. And the credit's already there, the child credit's already there, but it is expanded. And again, in part to counter the personal exemption.
And then there are some conspiracy theorists out there who might say one of the reasons maybe you're holding off until Monday, there are some health concerns for various senators when you get it out there for the final vote. Are you worried about that aspect of having everybody who's going to vote yes in good enough health to be on the floor to vote?
Well, of course, we all wish for Senator McCain to have great health for as long as possible. And my sense is everybody's made a commitment to be there next week, and you know, we'll certainly be able to have the vote. But our prayers go to him and his family.
Absolutely. Sir, thank you. Thank you for your
time.
You
bet. Thanks, Melissa. Take care.
Well, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, pushing for action against Iran for violating the nuclear agreement. How she is asking the international community to respond. Plus, a devastating wildfire ripping through Southern California, now blamed for the death of a firefighter. A family of first responders grappling with the loss as they try to keep that fire from spreading.
When my phone rang this morning and I got that phone call, it is the phone call that no fire chief ever wants to receive.
An investigation is underway now regarding the death of a California firefighter killed while battling the massive Thomas fire there. Officials confirm Corey Iverson was injured yesterday while fighting flames just outside of Los Angeles in the city of Fillmore. Iverson later died. An accident review team is trying to figure out now what happened. Iverson was an 8-year veteran of the Cal Fire Department. He leaves behind a pregnant wife and a 2-year-old daughter, along with a family of firefighters.
He's the type of man you'd want your daughter to marry and the type of fireman you'd want your son to grow up to be. He was the type of guy that you could rely on. Nothing more, nothing less. He was the best fireman that you could ever hope to have on your engine.
Iverson's is the second death linked to the Thomas fire. It also has destroyed hundreds of homes and torched more than 250,000 acres. Officials say the fire is now 35% contained.
U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, says Iran has violated the nuclear agreement, and yesterday she presented what she says is physical proof. Haley stood next to pieces of an Iranian rocket that she says were fired at a Saudi Arabian airport in Riyadh by Houthi rebels in Yemen. She blamed Iran for selling the rocket to the rebels and explained how it could bring danger to America's doorstep.
Just imagine if this missile had been launched at Dulles Airport or JFK, or the airports in Paris, London, or Berlin. The fight against Iranian aggression is the world's fight.
Joining me now is Michael Singh, a former Senior Director of Middle Eastern Affairs at the National Security Council and Managing Director of the Washington Institute. Sir, thank you for joining us. Is there any way to dispute that evidence that she had there?
Well, Melissa, it's pretty compelling evidence, and it builds on evidence that was provided a bit earlier by the United Nations itself, because the missiles and the boats in question are pretty close matches or even exact matches for what we know is in Iran's own arsenal. Some of the pieces are actually even stamped with the logos of Iranian manufacturers. And, of course, some of these items were actually found on Iranian cargo boats being transported towards Yemen. So it's pretty compelling evidence. I think the only questions that our partners may raise is, well, when was it transferred? Was it during the period of the UN sanctions, or was it before that?
Yeah. You talk about the sanctions because if it is what it appears to be, it violates about 4 UN, various resolutions where they had promised not to do that. But it's unclear if it violates the nuclear sanctions.
Well, that's right. So this violates both the resolutions which prohibit providing arms to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, as well as Resolution 2231, which was the one that enshrined the Iran nuclear deal, that basically says Iran can't export any arms. It doesn't really violate the nuclear deal itself because, unfortunately, in what I think is an omission, that deal actually leaves out missiles entirely. They're not part of the nuclear agreement.
Why do you think that was?
Well, you know, the Obama administration, when the deal was negotiated, basically said, look, you know, we would have loved to have had missiles in there, but we just couldn't do it. The Iranians wouldn't go for it. And I think really what that neglects is that missiles are, of course, a central part of any nuclear program. And, of course, Iran's missile proliferation around the region risks making all of these conflicts, whether in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, or in Iraq, that much more dangerous to our interests.
Yeah. And this missile, I mean, it was lobbed right at the Riyadh airport, you know, which is it's not like it's a military base. I mean, this is a commercial airport. I've flown in and out of there. I mean, these are civilians. The question becomes now, what do you do about it? What does the international community do about this?
Well, that's right, Melissa. I was at that airport just a few days ago, and of course, that 900-kilometer range of these missiles, as well as those anti-ship cruise missiles in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, put a lot of international interests at risk. And so I think we're going to use that to go to our partners now and say we need a stepped-up effort, not only to sanction Iran for these activities, but to interdict these weapons, both by sea as well as by air, and, you know, the potential overland route via Oman over the Arabian Peninsula. And, you know, we'll face some resistance in doing that. So but I think this presentation by Ambassador Haley is really a first step to making that case.
Yeah, it was very compelling. We watched it live, and there was a lot there. Sir, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. Michael Singh.
Thank you.
Some new revelations about how the FBI handled Hillary Clinton's private email investigation. What changes were made to James Comey's prepared statement?
These events that we have been seeing over the last year, but now recently, are just terrifying because it's really threatening the integrity of our justice system.
James Comey's statement that exonerated Hillary Clinton was edited and we now know watered down. Fox News obtaining documents showing the former FBI director said Hillary Clinton was, quote, grossly negligent for using a personal email server during her time as Secretary of State. But then months later, those words in the early draft were changed to extremely careless. The White House is reacting.
The president is absolutely supportive of and has full faith and confidence in the rank-and-file members of the DOJ and also the FBI. However, it is troubling, deeply troubling, that the revelations have now come to light that there is extreme bias against this president with high-up members of the team there at the FBI who were investigating Hillary Clinton at the time. And we're a little concerned at what we're seeing here. Obviously, those text messages give us quite a bit of pause.
Joining me now is attorney and Democratic commentator Monique Presley and Gianno, strategist and Fox News political analyst. Thanks to both of you for joining me. Thank you. Monique, I'll let you go first. I mean, this looks pretty bad.
It looks pretty bad to anyone who's looking for an excuse to derail and discredit the FBI. It's pretty obvious that the FBI agents are supposed to be apolitical. That doesn't mean that they don't have opinions. It doesn't mean that they don't have the right to vote. It just means that their opinions are not supposed to be publicly held. Anyone who works in those positions certainly internally has opinions, and that's all we're seeing coming to the fore here.
Well, it seems like it's a little bit more than that, because what we are seeing is someone who in a text says, you know, I hope that this president doesn't get elected, but I hope that the plan that you laid out, you know, that happens. But at the same time, you know, we'll have a backup plan just in case. And when you have the same person texting that, you know, they support one candidate over the other, and then they're the actual one who is changing the text in this statement, it gets to be a little bit more than just a political opinion, Gianno, do you think?
I completely agree, and I start off with a question to Monique, which I know the answer to. She's a high-profile attorney, defended many high-profile clients, and I would say, Peter Strzok is somebody that she would not want on her jury, and I'm sure she would agree with that because he has definitely shown his bias. Lisa Page told him in an email that he was the guy to protect the country from the menace, that being Donald Trump. The FBI is not a political organization. They should not determine who wins or loses based on political preferences, and this is something that the FBI, the folks that are on this Mueller team, which is the most sensitive investigation in the history of our country into potential Russian collusion, this is something that the investigators should be investigated. Everyone on that investigation we should know what's going on for each individual, not just the ones that we know about currently, but each individual. All cards has to be on the table.
And Monique, I would say, I mean, we do know that this was the individual that went in and changed the language to something that was criminal to then language that would indicate that the Clintons' behavior was not criminal.
Yes, because words matter, and the individual was trying to line up the words in the statement with the actual finding, which was that there was not criminal activity, that there was not criminal negligence. And I think that Gianna's comparison is interesting. Sure, I may not want this person on my jury, but does he sound exactly like an investigator whose job it is to ferret out crime and prove it? Yes. Does he sound like someone in the prosecutor's office who sees that a president or someone who's about to be president is a really bad hombre who's doing some things that he shouldn't be doing, and everyone surrounding him is doing things that is inculpating them? Then certainly that's someone who would not want that person to end up being the president of the United States of America. And that's exactly what this agent was saying, who had way more information than we have at this time. That agent was saying, whoa, I hope this guy doesn't end up being the leader of the free world. When the text messages were found, they got rid of him.
But Gianno, I mean, if you look at just the facts as they're laid out in front of us, he went back and changed the language to fit the outcome they wanted, as opposed to the natural language that came to them when they actually did the investigation.
And Monique is a very reasonable person. She's someone that I know. I call her sister. I think she can at least acknowledge that the bias here is very consistent with someone who you would not want to be over an investigation into something as sensitive as our country. This has global impact. This isn't a political win-up for the Democrats or Republicans. This is something that impacts every one of us and our allies across the country. Certainly, for an individual who has said he's a supporter of Hillary Clinton, he doesn't want to see that idiot, as he called Donald Trump, in the White House. For him to be someone that's been intimately involved in investigations, which has changed the dynamic of how we view elections, is something that's very troubling. It's problematic, and the Inspector General of the DOJ rightly is looking into this, and other individuals need to be looked into as well.
We got to go. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Oscar-winning actor Dustin Hoffman now accused of exposing himself to a woman when she was society. She is just the latest woman to accuse the actor of sexual misconduct. Hoffman's lawyer is now fighting back. Live with that from Los Angeles. Adam.
Yeah, John, every day it seems like the accusations continue. The list continues to grow longer and longer, not only in the world of Hollywood, but also in politics and sports. The latest big name is one we've heard before, as you mentioned, Dustin Hoffman. His name has been brought up in this scandal before. A new woman, now 5 total new women, have come forward alleging sexual harassment and assault by the award-winning iconic actor. Variety reports that Hoffman allegedly exposed himself to a teenager in 1980, allegedly assaulted a woman in 1987 during the filming of the movie Ishtar. Another woman said Hoffman forced her to perform oral sex during the period around the time they did All the President's Men. Hoffman's attorney calling all these new accusations against the actor defamatory falsehoods. The 5 new accounts bring the total to 8 women now accusing the actor. Of course, Hoffman did respond earlier this month to a woman who claimed she was sexually harassed when she was 17. Hoffman apologized and said the allegations were not reflective of who I am. That was a quote. Meantime, based on media reports, the New York Police Department has opened an investigation into music mogul Russell Simmons. Multiple women accuse the mogul of sexual misconduct, including rape. 9 women now in total allege the incidents happened over the course of the last 2 decades. The NYPD says it can open an investigation without complaints made directly to them, and clearly this is the case with Simmons because of the media reports in regards to him. Now, Thursday night, Brad Rose, an attorney for Simmons, released a statement saying, in part, that Russell Simmons fully supports and will cooperate with the police inquiry and is confident of a swift resolution. Meantime, ABC has fired Chef Mario Batali from the show The Chew, I should say. And the accusations continue also in the sports world, John. ESPN and the NFL Network are also dealing with accusations. And so, as we mentioned, the list continues to grow. The accusations continue here in Hollywood. John?
All right. Thanks very much.
President Trump spotlighting his record on regulation by literally cutting red tape. More on this and why he calls it a success for every American. And the New York Times adding fact checkers. Our media panel will look at that move and what it means for news industry in an ongoing battle with the President of the United States.
We're going to speak straight to the American people and cut right through the fake news media.
President Trump touting a year of reducing government regulations by literally cutting the red tape, saying that at the event that 22 regulations have been removed for every new one that was introduced, a move he says is strengthening our economy.
Let's cut the red tape. Let's set free our dreams, and yes, let's make America great again. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by getting rid of a lot of unnecessary regulation. We will have a great regulatory climate. 1, 2, 3.
Later today, the White House is set to release a detailed profile of all the regulations undone since President Trump.
Well, breaking now, the New York Times adds an additional fact checker to its staff. Politico points out news outlets are increasing their push for accuracy as errors are becoming fodder for attacks from President Trump. Let's talk about it with our media panel today. Franco Ordonez is the White House correspondent for McClatchy and co-host of the Majority Minority podcast. Hugo Gurdon is the editorial director for the Washington Examiner. I think a lot of people were surprised when they saw this piece in Politico, Franco. I just assumed that an organization like the New York Times would have such a person, but they have added one to their D.C. bureau. What do you think about the move?
I think it's interesting. I mean, that the fact that it's a fact checker. I mean, obviously, our news organizations have had copy editors that kind of done a lot of this role, but to have a fact checker is an interesting change. But I think it's a good thing. There's an onslaught of news happening. There's such a rush to get there, to get it first. And really nothing trumps accuracy. And we need to work harder to make sure that we get the reporting that we're doing, we get the story right. And as you pointed out in the intro, the Trump administration and others have used kind of errors as weapons in a way.
Yeah, well, and the president just did so this morning, Hugo. He was making that appearance in front of the FBI Academy, and he drew loud applause when he pointed to the press in the back of the room. Here it is.
To many other young Americans watching at home, of which there are many. You see, there's the fake news back there. Look, everybody. Fake news. No, actually, some of them are fine people.
So the president got a laugh line with the fake news reference, Hugo. Does bringing fact checkers on board, does it help give him less ammunition?
Look, any move to make the news reporting more accurate is in itself a good thing. And a fact checker might, for example, have really helped something happened and connections between Team Trump and the Russians. But there's a real note of caution that should be entered here, and that is most of the problems with a lot of news reporting are not really to do with factual mistakes. They're to do with story choices. And there's a very good example, I think, of the New York Times recently. When the stories emerged, when the facts emerged about texts between investigators on Robert Mueller's investigation of collusion with Russia and election meddling, the New York Times moved very swiftly on to stories about Republicans pouncing on these texts and using them as suggestion, to suggest that there was bias. They didn't dwell or give proper weight to the fact that there might actually be bias. And so, in a way, having a fact checker can be a sort of camouflage or a mask for what actually produces distorted news, and that is story choice rather than little mistakes that might be picked up by a fact checker.
And in relation, Hugo, to what you just said, Politico, referring to Emily Cochran, the person who was just given this job at the New York Times, Politico wrote this: unlike magazines who have fact checkers, Emily Cochran, does not deal with sources, so she likely would not have prevented the type of high-profile sourcing mistakes. And they are limited in their role.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, look, the buck stops with us. As newspaper reporters, it's our byline on the story. And the truth, as those examples are, the reality is if one knucklehead can kind of hurt our reputation. And we need to work harder. Obviously, there's issues with the cuts and copy editing. This has been an issue that we've been facing for years now, with kind of cuts in costs as well as new technology. And it's probably something that the industry needs to take a closer look at to make sure that those checks and balances are put in place, especially now with the increased news, the onslaught of news that's coming, how it's being used. In addition, it's something that we're looking at as well at the Washington Bureau. As a reporter, I absolutely want to make sure that my stories are correct. I don't want mistakes because, they can be used against me and they can be used against my organization, and we want to get it right.
Yeah. All right. Very good point on which to end. We'll cut it there. Thanks very much, Franco Ordonez, Hugo Gurdon.
Thank you.
Welcome to the jungle, why U.S. soldiers are training to fight on a terrain much different from the Middle East.
No!